For centuries, humanity has asked many important questions. Are we alone in the universe? What happens after death? And perhaps the greatest mystery of them all? Why does YouTube suddenly stop working right when the good part starts? But today, we are here to answer a question far more terrifying. A question that absolutely nobody needed answered, yet somehow everybody secretly wants to know. Just how rich is Satoru Gojo? Now let's get one thing out of the way. Gojo doesn't just look rich. He radiates the kind of confidence usually reserved for people who have never checked the price tag in their entire lives. Seriously. This man walks around wearing expensive clothes, travels wherever he wants, consumes enough sweets to concern several doctors, and somehow behaves as though financial problems were invented by other people. Which raises an important question. Was he always rich? Or did he simply discover the greatest side hustle in human history? Fortunately, the answer lies within something even more terrifying: generational wealth. Because unlike the rest of us, who inherited emotional damage, questionable genetics, and an embarrassing digital footprint from middle school, Satoru Gojo inherited the Gojo Clan, one of the three great families in Jujutsu society. Meaning this man basically entered life with premium membership already activated. And let's be honest, every young guy has had that moment, lying in bed at 2 in the morning, unable to sleep, planning an entire billionaire lifestyle, despite having $17 in the bank, a mansion in Japan, 3 sports cars, a private island, and somehow an underground gaming room larger than the actual house. Meanwhile, Gojo doesn't need imagination, because for him, that might just be Tuesday. And trust me, we haven't even reached the terrifying part yet. Now here's the problem. Saying Satoru Gojo is rich doesn't actually tell us anything, because rich is one of the most useless words ever invented. A guy with a nice car is rich. A celebrity is rich. The kid who somehow owns every skin in every game is rich. Those are completely different levels of money. So when people say Gojo is rich, what does that actually mean? Because there's a huge difference between owning a luxury apartment and owning the apartment building. There's a huge difference between buying expensive clothes and never needing to think about money at all. And that's where this investigation gets interesting. Because Gojo isn't a real person. He doesn't have a tax report. He doesn't have a Forbes interview. He doesn't even have a bank account we can stalk at 3 in the morning. So we're left with one option. We estimate, we gather clues, we look at everything we know, and then we make the most dangerous decision known to mankind. Math. Now, before anyone starts throwing calculators at me, let's establish some ground rules. We're not trying to figure out whether Gojo can afford a pizza. That battle was won before the opening credits. We're trying to figure out what category of rich he belongs to. Millionaire? Multi-millionaire? Hundreds of millions? Or the kind of rich where numbers stop feeling real and start sounding like cheat codes? Because those are very different worlds. And trust me, the deeper I looked into this, the weirder it got. So, what clues do we actually have? Because if we're going to estimate Gojo's wealth, we need something more than guesses. The first clue isn't money, it's influence. Think about it. When Gojo walks into a room, nobody asks who he is. Everyone already knows. That kind of reputation isn't something you buy. It's something the entire Jujutsu world recognizes. And in almost every society, influence and wealth tend to move together. The people with the most power usually control the most resources. Now look at Gojo. He's trusted with missions that decide the fate of the entire country. He teaches at the most prestigious Jujutsu school. High-ranking officials constantly rely on him. Even his enemies build entire plans around avoiding him. Not because of money, because losing Gojo changes everything. That tells us something important. Gojo isn't just valuable, he's irreplaceable. And when someone becomes irreplaceable, Their value stops following normal rules. Imagine running a company. If one employee disappeared tomorrow, business continues. But if your entire company depended on one person, that person becomes priceless. That's basically Gojo's situation. His existence alone changes the balance of power, which means if the Jujutsu world worked anything like ours, someone with that level of importance wouldn't just live comfortably, they'd have access to almost anything they needed. Money wouldn't be the reward. It would simply stop being a problem, and honestly, that's a much scarier level of wealth. Because once money stops being something you think about, you're playing a completely different game. But here's where things get even stranger. There's one clue almost everyone overlooks, and it might completely change our estimate. So, after going through every clue, every piece of evidence, and every assumption we could reasonably make, here's the conclusion. Gojo isn't rich in the way normal people understand wealth. He's closer to the kind of person who never has to ask, "Can I afford this?" Because when you belong to one of the most powerful clans, when the higher-ups depend on you, when your existence alone keeps the balance of the entire Jujutsu world, money stops acting like a limit. It becomes a convenience. There's no official number, no bank statement, no tax records, so no estimate will ever be perfect. But based on everything we've seen, it's reasonable to place Gojo somewhere among the absolute wealthiest people in the Jujutsu world. Not because we saw his bank account, but because every clue points in the same direction. His status, his influence, his access, his lifestyle, his position, individually, as none of them prove anything. Together, they tell a completely different story. So, was Gojo secretly a billionaire? Probably not. Could he have been worth hundreds of millions? It's definitely possible. But the real answer is actually much simpler. Gojo lived like someone who never had to think about money in the first place. And honestly, that's a level of wealth most people never reach. So after all this investigating, after all these calculations, and after spending way too much time trying to figure out the bank account of a fictional character, we finally reached our answer. Satoru Gojo wasn't just rich, he was ridiculously rich. Unfortunately, not even all that money could save him from the infamous Kit Kat incident. Turns out, infinite wealth still isn't infinite plot armor.